upon the April 11th officer-involved shooting with Rockford Police Department. Those are really just updates. Most of the facts, really all the facts that we can disclose have been disclosed at prior press conferences or in press releases. The focus or the meat of today's press conference will be the officer-involved fatal crash involving Rockford Police Department that occurred on April 25th. And so with that, let me give a brief update on the officer-involved shooting on April 10th. So the neighborhood canvass has been completed. The officer walkthrough was done. The date of the incident, the autopsy is in progress. Social media was checked. The medical information is being obtained. We're kind of in the midst of the investigation. Probably most of the tasks have been completed. Now we're just kind of waiting. So the best example for that, as we discussed last press conference, is the forensic evidence. So we're waiting on the crime lab to finish up their work. So that's kind of that case. And again, as a reminder, Mr. Gratigo was the deceased in that case. Next, we have the April 11th incident involving Rockford Police Officer McGinnis. The injured party in that case was Jose Gonzalez Jr. In terms of progress, again, pretty much in the middle of the investigation. I think officers from Rockford, most of the reports have been written. I think they're still some of them are still actually being written and provided to the task force. But again, really just waiting on some medical information for Gonzalez Jr. and the crime lab information. So those are the updates on those two cases. The incident that occurred on April 25th was an officer-involved fatal crash, and I just want to remind everyone that this is still an ongoing investigation. Our understanding of the facts may change, but I'm going to essentially almost read a factual statement, and of course I can take questions at the end. At approximately 4:42 p.m. on Sunday, April 25th, the Rockford Police Department scope officers initiated a traffic stop on a black 2020 Toyota Camry for traffic violations. I don't know what the exact traffic violations were at this time. The Toyota fled the scene in the area of Whitman Street and Church Street. The vehicle fled across Whitman Street and out of the sight of the officers. They did not continue any pursuit. There were multiple officers throughout Rockford who were on the radio attempting to relocate the suspect. At one point, an officer had checked the license plate reader and learned that the vehicle was last seen driving near the corner of South Main and Harrison Avenue. The vehicle's registered address was 3307 Nashville Drive in Rockford, Illinois. It was then Officer Geiken who turns north onto 9th Street from Sandy Hollow, and he saw the suspect vehicle, the Camry, turn north onto 9th Street from Sawyer, which was approximately a quarter mile ahead. At that time, Officer Geiken did not activate his emergency lights. He did not initiate a traffic stop, nor did he attempt to catch up to the vehicle while it was traveling on 9th Street. At about the same time, other officers arrived in the area of Brook Road and 9th Street. Brook Road is north of Sandy Hollow on 9th. And they see the suspect vehicle and were able to they didn't have their lights or sirens on. And actually the suspect vehicle at that time it's not believed that it was traveling at a high rate of speed. They put down what are called stop sticks at that intersection. The suspect vehicle went northbound, traveled over those stop sticks, and the front, they believe one front tire and one rear tire was punctured. Again, they believe some of the tires were punctured. Exactly which, we're not sure at this point. And it was that time that the Camry increased its speed after going through the stop sticks. So the distance from Brook Road to Harrison, where the accident eventually occurred, is about a quarter of a mile. And the suspect vehicle, I'm sorry, not a quarter of a mile, a half mile from Brook Road to Harrison. And the Camry then entered the intersection of Harrison against a red light. An initial review shows that the suspect vehicle was traveling approximately 90 miles per hour when it entered the intersection. Officer Geiken continued to follow the vehicle, but the video and evidence right now shows that he was approximately a quarter of a mile behind the suspect, and again, never activated his emergency lights or siren, and he did not match the speed of the suspect vehicle as it sped up. There were other officers in the area. They were on Harrison at the intersection of Harrison and 9th on, I think, the west lane, if I'm reading this correctly, on the west lane. They, again, did not have their sirens on. They were just in the area because the call went out. There is camera footage from the squad cars facing the intersection when the suspect vehicle struck a tan Chevy Silverado that was traveling in the opposite, in the perpendicular with a green light. Another vehicle traveling near the Silverado was struck by the suspect vehicle. The driver of the Chevy Silverado, Raymond Jackson, was deceased. There were 2 passengers in the vehicle. They were minors. I believe their ages were 11 and 3. The driver of the vehicle was identified as Devonta Flint. He was the only occupant of the car. It's our understanding that he is still in the hospital receiving medical care. While receiving medical care, it was discovered that he had a bag strapped to his body. In that bag was approximately 40 grams of suspected heroin, fentanyl, cocaine, and approximately $600 cash. As I indicated, he was transported to the hospital, and we believe, we don't believe, he's still at the hospital. So there are the typical tasks that would accompany any investigation. In a case like this, you've got the dash cam video of the officers, and an accident reconstructionist came out to the scene. And that accident reconstructionist is part of the Integrity Task Force. And a little bit later, I'm going to talk about why the task force was activated. But I wanted to indicate that Devonta Smith that night was charged with traffic tickets of failure to reduce speed and disregarding a traffic control device. The investigation into Devonta Flint is still ongoing. I did want to talk about Devonta Smith because I think this may have come out, but this is public knowledge or public information, but I think it bears mentioning. So at the time of his arrest, there were 3 warrants out for his arrest, and he had the following pending charges. So 18 CF 996, which was pending at the time of this incident, was a delivery of a controlled substance, possession with intent to deliver a controlled substance, and possession of a stolen firearm. 18 CF 1001 is another incident in which he was charged with 2 counts of delivery of a controlled substance. Eventually, he was arrested on those charges. He was in custody of the Sheriff's Department. He then was released on a furlough over the state's objection, and he was furloughed to the Men's Life Recovery Program, which I believe is at the Rockford Rescue Mission. He was unsuccessfully discharged from the rescue mission and turned himself into the Winnebago County Jail. Later, while he's in custody, he gets another furlough to the Salvation Army Men's Rehabilitation Program. He fails to appear in court in October of 2019, and a bench warrant was issued. In September of 2019, there was another complaint and warrant issued for his arrest. And the complaint, which eventually he was indicted, was for aggravated battery to a pregnant person and domestic battery. As an important reminder, these are allegations. He's innocent until proven guilty or otherwise. That warrant is still outstanding. Next, in April of 2021, mid-April, a complaint and warrant is issued for his arrest. This is the third warrant. That complaint was for aggravated battery to a pregnant person. It's a different victim from the other agbat to a pregnant person, and domestic battery. That warrant was for $1,000. So again, we believe he's got a no bond warrant, a $50,000 warrant, and a $100,000 warrant. The significance of that is when he's released from the hospital, he'll be going to the Winnebago County Jail on those warrants. I did want to point out kind of why the Integrity Task Force has this, why they were activated. So I think I've talked about the Police and Community Relations Improvement Act essentially requires that an independent law enforcement agency investigate incidents that where there's an officer-involved death. So that's by statute, it has to happen. However, the Integrity Task Force in Winnebago and Boone County goes a little bit farther. It's broader. That can be activated. There doesn't have to necessarily be a death. So let's talk about the three cases. You've got the county case in which Faustino Guitago was deceased. The Integrity Task Force, per its own policy and guidelines, is activated, and the statute requires that there be an independent review. In the city case, where Gonzalez Jr. was injured, the statute doesn't require that be investigated by an independent agency. However, the Memorandum of Understanding and Policies and Procedures of the Integrity Task Force indicate that would be investigated by the task force, which is exactly what happened. Now, in this case, officer-involved death in the statute is actually defined as any death resulting from a motor vehicle accident if law enforcement was engaged in law enforcement activity involving the individual or the individual's vehicle in the process of apprehension or attempt to apprehend. So again, I don't want to speak for the Chief of Police of Rockford at the time, Chief O'Shea, but he believed that he didn't have all the information, but certainly it almost certainly fell under this definition because there was an attempt to apprehend the driver of the Camry. In addition, because our task force has policies and procedures that are broader than the statute, they could have been activated under that as well. It's also important to note that when they're activated within minutes of this happening. And so, Chief O'Shea at the time doesn't know what the pursuit was like, whether, a lot of the facts I explained today, he would not have known. And so that investigation was then taken over by the Illinois State Police, and more specifically the Integrity Task Force. So hopefully that answers a few of your questions. Let me check my outline real quick and make sure I got to everything that I needed to. One last thing. I actually want to compliment you all in the kind of minutes and hours and days since it happened. I've heard the word chase on multiple occasions, and in reading the articles that you've all put out, that word wasn't included, and I think that's really significant. This was a fatal crash involving an officer-involved fatal crash is generally what we would refer to this as. I think that's the appropriate way to describe it. And as the facts have borne out, we don't believe there was a chase or even if you could call it a pursuit. But I've been a little bit frustrated because people have said there was a chase. And again, as the facts have been described, I don't think that's an accurate depiction. And I appreciate the fact that, having checked the articles and read the articles that you all have put out, that you used the phrase officer-involved fatal crash.